Today I'm going to talk about a book called What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, A History of Islam in the United States. Sometimes we don't appreciate what we have until we look at the opposite. And then also I talk about, in the book Miracles in American History and Who was the King in America, I go through some of this information as well. And why is this an interesting topic? Well, because of the candidate that just got elected in the Democrat primary in New York, and so we can learn from history. So history is not prophetic, but it is predictive. Past behavior is the best indicator of future performance. And then I'm not sure I need to do anything to turn the PowerPoint on. Let's see here. As soon as it gets up, I'll go through it. So, do I need to press a button here? Oh, on the side here, okay. There we go, on. All right, there we go. And, well, maybe you need a little more help. Oh. So I go down or, okay. So news headlines, live update, Iran launches first ever full-scale military attack on Israel. We all saw that news. And what? I wanted to talk about the history of Israel, and it goes back to Abraham and Isaac. He's the first one in the Promised Land, and that's around 1800 BC. Joshua comes into the Promised Land with the children of Israel around 1400 BC out of Egypt. David captures Jerusalem around 1000 BC. And then the Assyrians come and take the 10 northern tribes of Israel captive to Assyria. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria, and that's where Jonah went. And then Judah is taken captive by Babylon around 587 BC, and then they get to come back, and the name Judah is sort of shortened to Jew. So Jew comes from Judah. And the temple is destroyed. Cyrus lets the Jews go back around 539 BC. And then it's all controlled by Persia, right? Well, Alexander the Great conquers Persia. And so Alexander the Great takes control of Jerusalem. And then you have the Greeks come, and you have two types of Jews. You have the Pharisees. Ezra was the leader of those, the student of the law. But then you have the Sadducees. And the Sadducees wanted to kiss up to the Greeks. And so they sort of looked with an embarrassment on their Jewish heritage. And they really didn't believe in miracles and in heaven and in angels and all that other kind of stuff. They were just political. And they actually got into a war with each other. And thousands got killed. The Maccabees throw off the Syrians, what's left from Alexander the Great's reign. You have this Hasmonean kingdom, which is this 100-year period where the Jews are their own kingdom again. They're completely independent. But that's when they get into this war between the Sadducees and Pharisees. And in that war is when the Romans move in. And so while the Jews are doing their civil war, you have Pompey, this Roman general, says, hey, there's a civil war in Israel. I think I'm going to go down there. And he sides with the Pharisees against the Sadducees. Sadducees control the Temple Mount, and he takes control of the Temple Mount and goes into the temple and sees it and turns around and tells his men, don't touch this place. It's like too holy. And so the Jews liked Pompey, but from this point on, the Judea is a Roman province. And of course, Jesus is born, his ministry, he dies, he's resurrected, and that all takes place in Judea. And then the day of Pentecost comes, and the church spreads. And so you see Christianity spread very quickly throughout the entire Roman Empire, and it becomes a Christian Rome. Nero persecutes the Jews, 64 AD, sets them on fire on torches in his garden. But also Nero sends Vespasian to attack Judea, 66 AD. And instead of defending themselves, the Pharisees and Sadducees start attacking each other inside of the city, and they quarter off the city of Jerusalem into all these different groups in their fight. It's not until the Romans are completely surrounding that they think, you know what, maybe we need to make up with each other and get back. So Vespasian attacks, Nero dies, and so Vespasian goes back to be the emperor, and his son Titus takes over, attacking Jerusalem and destroys Jerusalem. And in 70 AD, the Jews are scattered. It's called the Great Diaspora. And then there's a Roman monument in Rome called the Arch of Titus, and it has the carvings of them taking the treasures out of the temple back to Rome. Matter of fact, there was so much gold, it was that gold from the temple that financed the building of the Colosseum. You know the big Colosseum in Rome? Well, that was financed from all the gold that they stole from Israel. And anyway, but you treat Israel bad, things bad happen to you. And so right after they took Israel captive, Mount Vesuvius blows up in Italy and destroys Pompeii and a lot of these different areas. And then there's a plague, and lots of people die. And so now we're going to fast forward to Hadrian. He's a Roman emperor, and the Jews have the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt. And they try to say that Simon Bar Kokhba was the Messiah, and the rabbis supported him until he turned around and killed the rabbis, and then they said, well, maybe he's not the Messiah. It's a little confusing. But he gets several 100,000 Jews to attack Roman soldiers and win. And so Hadrian sends a legion over there, and they're all killed, 12,000 soldiers. He sends another legion over there. They're all killed. They just disappear from history. And then Hadrian sends all the Roman legions to Judea and goes city by city, town by town, and wipes them out. And he kills 500,000 Jews at this one battle of Beitar. He executes the rabbis, burns the Torah, prohibits the Hebrew calendar, kills as many descendants of David as he could find, builds a temple to Jupiter on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, renames the city after his family name, Aelia Capitolina, and he changes the name of Judea to Syria Palestina. That's where you get the name Palestine, right? Everyone says, oh, Palestine, but where did that come from? It came from Hadrian, because he wanted to erase Jews from history. He was so mad at them for wiping out his legions. So we fast forward in history. The whole Roman Empire eventually becomes Christian, and then you have Islam comes along. And so this was the October 7th, the terrible killing of those Jews and the beheading of Christians. And so apologists, whenever there's a terrorist attack, say that the terrorists don't represent true Islam. But a lot of times the terrorists themselves are yelling Allahu Akbar, and they think they are representing true Islam. So who can tell us what true Islam is? One person, Muhammad. He's the best Muslim that ever lived. And so his life is called the Sunnah, which means the way or the example. And his life went through 3 stages. He was a religious leader, and then he became a political leader, and then he became a military leader. And we have to understand this because those that are wanting to follow him follow these 3 steps. And so this is the Byzantine Roman Empire. It's now Christian, and this is 20 years before Muhammad was born. So the green area is all a Christian Roman Empire, and it's fighting Persia. Persia is Zoroastrian. It's like the East versus the West, like the Cold War, the U.S. versus the USSR. Back then it was the Byzantine Christian West fighting the Persian Zoroastrian East. They beat each other up so bad they left a power vacuum, and into that power vacuum came Islam. So Muhammad was born in 570 AD. His father dies before he's born. His mother dies when he's 6. His grandfather and guardian dies when he's 8. He's orphaned and taken in by an uncle, Abu Talib, who's a merchant who takes Muhammad on camel rides. He goes to different cities, hears about different religions. He hears about the pagan religions, and in Arabia they had 360 different pagan idols in their Kaaba, and the most popular was Hubal, the moon god, and they had this rock they thought had fallen from the moon. It was a glass impact rock where a meteor hit the desert sands, and they would kiss it and walk around it and bow to it for centuries pre-Muhammad. The Zoroastrians in Persia believed that paradise was filled full of virgins that would fulfill all the guy's desires. And Muhammad heard this and incorporated it into his belief system. There's Jews communities and Christians and then a group called Manichaeism. And Mani was this guy that's combined stuff from other religions. From his point of view, he was extracting the truth out of these other religions, but from our point of view, he was just combining stuff. And so Muhammad heard about this guy that combined stuff from different religions, and he's 20 some odd years old, working for a wealthy widow named Khadijah. She's widowed twice. She's 40. She marries Muhammad. And so now Muhammad doesn't have to work, and he goes out to caves and prays. And he's in a cave, and a spirit appears to him and squeezes him and commands him to read. He said, I cannot read. Spirit squeezes him a second time, said, read. He said, I cannot read. Spirit squeezes him a third time, said, read. He said, I cannot read. And then he began to recite. And that's how the Quran came to Muhammad. He'd get these verses, repeat them till he had them memorized, and then he would teach them to his followers. And people say, how could they remember all these verses? Well, in Arabic, they had a little rhyme to them, a little beat, very similar to rap music, right? And so somebody maybe can't read, but they memorize these long rap songs. But the idea of going out into a cave and praying, this was a Christian movement in the 5th century, which is basically their version of separation of church and state. It was this movement that swept through Christianity that says if you really become a Christian, you should give away all your money and then go off and live in a cave and enjoy your own personal relationship with Jesus, or join a monastery and take vows of silence so nobody will ever hear from you again. But it was all this me-focused, and it was saying, I'm going to abandon the world and not try to be salt. And so Muhammad, and in Egypt, they had the desert fathers. These were guys who climbed on platforms they built in the desert and bake in the sun, thinking they're denying their flesh and getting holier. But it was all this withdrawal from society. And so Muhammad went out to this cave to try to follow what Christians are doing. But when the Spirit appears to him, he goes to his wife, Khadijah, and tells her that he thinks he's demon-possessed. That's what it says. And she decides to test the Spirit by removing some of her veils and her robes, and kept saying, can you see the Spirit? And he goes, yeah, over there, until finally she removed enough that he said he couldn't see the Spirit. And she said, well, it must have been from God because it was embarrassed to look upon me without all my veils on. That was the test that Muhammad used to decide whether the Spirit was from God or not. Now, in the Bible, it tells us how to test the Spirit. Every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus as the Christ is not of God. But Muhammad was illiterate. He never could read and write, so he never read the Old Testament. Now, here's Hubal, the moon god. And so in Arabia, their calendar began with the first sight of the crescent moon over the desert for centuries pre-Muhammad. And there's that rock. It was destroyed in a fire, and they took what's left of it and put a silver rim around it. And that's the Kaaba that housed these 360 different pagan idols, including the Kaaba. The Sabaeans were another group, and they're the ones that were into going on a pilgrimage to Mecca and walking in a circle around the thing and ritual washing, throwing rocks at Satan and so forth. And so some of that was incorporated into Muhammad's belief. There's the Zoroastrian and then the Manichaeism. And so Muhammad never read the Old Testament because he was illiterate, but he heard the oral traditions called Talmud and Mishnah. And Muhammad couldn't read the New Testament. Matter of fact, here's a 2011 UN Development Program report. 30% of the people in Egypt today cannot read. And so the Jews and Christians were the exception. They were called the people of the book. Jews and Christians could read. And so Thomas Carlyle wrote on the Quran in a book in 1840, Arabs see more method in it than we. Much of it is rhythmic, a kind of wild chanting. And so the verses in the Quran had a little, like rap music. And so nobody explained to Muhammad the Holy Spirit. So he thought the Trinity was the Father, Mary, and Jesus. There are Muslims today that think Christians are polytheists, worshiping three gods, the Father, Mary, and Jesus. It's like, oh, no, that's not, that is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And even Encyclopedia Britannica stated of Muhammad, the gospel was known to him chiefly through apocryphal and heretical sources. And so here he is. 610 AD. He has this faith that has a little bit of everybody's faith in it, and he thinks that it'll unite the world. And so he goes to Mecca and finds out nobody else likes it. And then he gets confrontational, and they consider him a disturber of the peace. And so after 12 years, he only makes 70 converts. They decide to chase him out of town. He tries to go to a city called Al-Taif. They don't want him. They pelt him with rocks and stones. And so then he goes to a city called Medina. And there were 3 Jewish clans that controlled Medina. And so he comes into Medina as a Muslim refugee, the first ever Muslim refugee. He's a Muslim immigrant. So he comes into this Jewish city, and the Jews let him in. They're tolerant. He presents their faith to the Jews, and the Jews say, well, you're not a prophet in the line of our Jewish prophets, so no, we're not going to believe your religion. But they let him stay. And so he goes into the minority neighborhoods, the inner city, and he begins to organize a following, and he gets involved in politics. And when his following gets big enough, he pressures the Jewish clans to now recognize him as a political leader. And so then when his followers back in Mecca get confrontational, they get chased out of town. Now there's a lot of Muslim immigrants, refugees, and they come into Medina, and they come into those neighborhoods. And Muhammad allows them to rob the caravans headed back to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out of town. He's like, okay, we're going to take the money from the rich neighborhoods. We're going to start redistributing it amongst ourselves. And so he becomes a military leader. And Muhammad fights in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. Kills about 3,000 people. One is the famous Battle of Badra. So the Meccans send 1,000 soldiers to Medina to stop Muhammad from robbing their caravans. And Muhammad, with 300, defeats 1,000. And he takes this victory as confirmation that Allah wants him to be a military leader. And he fights in the Battle of Uhud, expulsion of Banu Nadir, which was one of the Jewish clans. Attack on Banu Mustalik, another, the word Banu means clan. Battle of the Trench. So he's attacking Medina, and Muhammad dug trenches all around the city of Medina, so the Meccans can't charge their horses and camels across the field because they'll break their legs. And then Battle of Khaybar and Mu'tah, and then finally he conquers Mecca in 630 AD, and then drives out these Christians called Ghassanids, and then he gets hadiths, he gets verses from his Allah. When the messenger of Allah sent out a raiding party, he would say to them, make your raids in the name of Allah, in the way of Allah. Fight whoever denies Allah. Do not steal from the booty. Well, what's this booty thing? Well, Hadith Sahih al-Bukhari says, Muhammad said, the person who participates in holy battles in Allah's cause will be recompensed by Allah either by a reward or booty if he survives, or will be admitted to paradise if he is killed. And then it says, Prophet, we've made lawful to you the slave girls who Allah has given you as booty. So you go out and fight in these battles, you come away with some slave girls. Whatever you take as spoils of war, lo, a fifth thereof is for Allah and for the messenger. So Muhammad got a fifth of the booty when they would go off and they would raid these caravans. And so in Islam, you get 4 wives plus as many extra women as you take in battle. And so Muhammad goes from religious to political to military, like RPM in your car, revolutions per minute. And so when we say there's freedom for all religions in America, Islam is not just a religion, because Muhammad was not just a religious leader. He was also a political leader and a military leader. And so the effort to split the religious side of Islam from the political military side is we're trying to split Muhammad. Who are we to split their prophet? He was all three. And so Muhammad, since he was chased out of Mecca, considered himself the victim. Well, you were intolerant of me, therefore I'm justified in attacking you and taking all your stuff. And so it's called psychological projection, where the attacker blames the victim. And anyway, so Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America in 1840 said, Muhammad put into the Quran not religious doctrines only, but political maxims, criminal and civil laws. So it's not just a religion. And one of the laws in the Quran, cut off the hands of thieves, whether they are male or female, as punishment for what they've done. And then Surah 24:2, a woman who has been raped is punished by 100 stripes. So in Islam, if a woman's raped, it's her fault for looking attractive and tempting the man. So the woman has to wear the burqa on purpose to look unattractive. And here is U.S. Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson wrote Law of the Middle East. He said, Islamic law offers the American lawyer a study in dramatic contrasts. Its striking features relative to our laws are not likenesses, but inconsistencies, not similarities, but contrarieties. The law of the Middle East is the antithesis of Western law, right? It's the exact opposite. So in America, we punish the person that commits the rape. In Islam, they punish the woman who's been raped. And so Muhammad gets 2 sets of verses based on the 2 cities he lived in. When he was in Mecca, he was just a religious leader, so the verses he got from his Allah were relatively more peaceful. The verses he gets in Medina are more political and military, and the later verses supersede the earlier verses. So in the Bible, we have an Old Testament with some violence in it, Moses and Joshua wiping out tribes, and the New Testament, Jesus and the apostles never killed anybody. So what do we say? The later example is the one we're going to try to imitate. It's the same way in Islam, only in reverse. Their peaceful verses came first when Muhammad was a religious leader in Mecca, and they're superseded or abrogated by the verses he gets in Medina, and they're more political and militant. That's the last example that Muhammad left. And so in 627 AD, Muhammad sends 10,000 soldiers to Medina, and that's when Muhammad dug the trenches around the city. And then after he drives the Meccans away, he goes back into the city, and those 3 Jewish clans that let him in 5 years earlier, he gets offended at one of the clans, confiscates their property, chases them out of the neighborhood. And the other 2 clans sort of keep their heads low, right? They're thinking politically. They're thinking sort of, oh, Democrat, Republican, right? I never got along with that clan. So now there's 2 Jewish clans left. And he gets offended at the second one, confiscates their property, chases them out of town. And the big Jewish clan sort of sits down, well, at least he's not picking on me. And now there's only one Jewish tribe left. And he's taking a bath, according to the Hadith, and a spirit appears to him and says, how can you rest when Allah's enemies are in your midst? And he says, where? And the spirit pointed at the last Jewish neighborhood. So he surrounds them for 28 days. When they surrender, he brings them into the market, chops off their heads, and sells the women and children into slavery. So within 5 years of Muhammad coming into the city of Medina as an immigrant refugee, there's not a Jew left in the city of Medina. They were chased out, killed, or enslaved. He went from being a religious immigrant to getting involved in politics to having random outbreaks of violence. So they say every week, a half a dozen churches are burned in France. And they're doing this violence. And within 5 years of Muhammad's death, every pre-existing culture in Arabia is wiped out. And so the pattern is 3 steps: religious, political, military. So you immigrate, increase, and then eliminate the host country, the host culture. And it says, Fox News, members of the first U.S. majority Muslim city in Hamtramck, Michigan, today we warn the Polish. And so now they're ringing their calls to prayer 5 times a day. And the people that are not Muslim, if you've ever heard it, it's sort of annoying. 5 o'clock in the morning, you hear the loud speakers of the imam. And so there's a 1,400-year track record of the Muslims coming in as immigrants and then increasing in numbers and then pushing out the previous inhabitants. It goes through 3 stages in history: Arab, Persian, Turkish, and then Arab Spring. And so their goal is a one-world government called a caliphate underneath of a one-world leader called the caliph. And a military invention just was invented and it was called the stirrup. The Romans and Greeks rode horses, but there was nothing to put your feet in. You just sort of balanced on the horse. The stirrup was invented over in India and Mongolia, where they tie a rope around a horse and leave 2 loops hanging for your big toes, because you would ride barefoot and it would help you keep balance. And that made its way to Persia with leather straps and metal, and that gave you more control. You could literally put the full power of a galloping horse now behind your sword. And so they have a sword made out of Damascus steel. So the Europeans made swords out of heavy metal, and they'd forge it. But this Damascus steel, they'd bend it back on itself, hammer it down, stick it in the fire, bend it on itself, and they keep hammering and hammering. Each time it would get thinner and thinner and stronger, like a razor blade. So they could hold the reins of the horse in one hand, scimitar sword in the other, and at a full gallop, they literally could slice someone in half. And so here's the U.S. Supreme Court chamber in Washington, D.C., has lawgivers throughout history, and it has Muhammad with his sword. And there's his sword. It's in a museum in the palace in Topkapi in Istanbul, right, where the Sultan had his palace. And one of Muhammad's generals was Khalid ibn al-Walid, nicknamed the Drawn Sword of Allah. He was undefeated in 100 battles. And so we see the growth of Islam from this little area of Mecca and Medina to all of Arabia. People forget the bottom corner of Arabia was a Jewish kingdom for 150 years. Today, Yemen, you know the Houthis? Where the Houthis are, that used to be a Jewish kingdom. And then they invaded into Jerusalem. Did you know Jerusalem had been a Byzantine Christian city since Constantine, 325 AD, around then? But now, around the 600s, is when Caliph Umar conquers it. And then they conquered into Syria. Did you know Syria was the first country to completely be Christian, evangelized by the Apostle Paul? The name Christian was first used in Syria until Caliph Umar conquered it in 648 AD. And then he conquered into Armenia. And then Egypt was completely Christian for 6 centuries, evangelized by Mark that wrote the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, until Amir ibn Alas conquers it. And then there used to be 250 Catholic dioceses along North Africa. Morocco, Algiers, Tunisia, Libya, that was all Christian. St. Augustine of Hippo was from Carthage. Today that's Tunisia. That's that little jut that's sticking out there. And then in the years, when they conquered, they held back the ships of papyrus. These were reeds that grew along the Nile Delta that they would soak in water, and then when they would dry, it would turn into what we call today paper. And so when the Muslims conquered Egypt, they held back the ships of papyrus, so there was a shortage of paper in Europe, so they wrote fewer books, and this is called the Dark Ages. Right? You go to the library and say, I want to pull out a book from the 8th century. Well, there's not too many books written in that century. Why? Well, because the Muslims had caused a paper shortage. And the largest library in the world was in Alexandria, Egypt. And when they conquered it, they found this library. And they went to their Caliph Umar. And they said, what do we do with all these books? And he said, every book that does not agree with the Quran, destroy. And every book that does agree with the Quran is redundant because we have the Quran, so destroy them all. It took 6 months to burn them all. And then they invaded Spain. And Spain had a bunch of Visigothic Christian kingdoms that did not get along. Toledo, Saragossa, Granada. And so the Muslims had 80,000 come across the Strait of Gibraltar. Their general was Tariq, and the name where he landed was a mountain, and the word for mountain is Jabal, so they call it Jabal Tariq. Jabal Tariq, Gibraltar. Gibraltar is Jabal Tariq. That's the mountain where Tariq landed with his 80,000 soldiers. And he would conquer one kingdom, and the other ones wouldn't come to the rescue. Oh, I'd never liked that kingdom. Their politics, right? Democrat, Republican, I wouldn't. And then they would conquer another kingdom, and then they would kidnap some king's sons and says, you better pay us tribute or we're going to kill your kid. And so they gradually took control of all of Spain in 10 years because they were on horses with Arabian horses with stirrups and scimitar swords. Europeans were still fighting on foot. You read the story of the Battle of Bordeaux. In one pass, they annihilated the entire Frankish army. And then they are outside of Paris, called the Battle of Tours. in 732 AD, exactly 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. They go from Arabia to Paris in a 100-year campaign. Now, Charles Martel, he's the grandfather of Charlemagne. He doesn't like the idea of standing in a field waiting for the Muslim cavalry to slice them up with the scimitar swords. So he puts his men on top of a hill, 30,000 guys packed together in a square. So horses don't want to charge into a square, and so it sort of throws off the battle strategy. And he sends some spies into the camp to free the captives, right? The booty, because you can have, 4 wives plus as many extra women as you take in battle. And so the commander, Abdul Rahman, sees his men leaving the fight to reclaim their booty, and he yells at him, and he gets distracted, and he gets killed. And now the Muslims cannot decide who their next commander is going to be. So they pick up and go back to Spain. That was the Battle of Tours in 732 AD, just 100 years after the death of Muhammad in 632 AD. And then they attack into Turkey. But back then it was the Byzantine Christian Empire. All 7 churches mentioned in the book of Revelation were conquered, right? Ephesus, Thyatira, and Sardis, and Pergamum, and Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And now the Greeks had Greek fire, where they'd mix oil and sawdust and spray it out of a cannon with a torch in front. And as the oil went past the torch, it would catch on fire, and then it would stick like napalm on the Muslim ships. And so the Muslims were stopped. And so that was the first expansion of Islam from 622 to 1071. And now definitions, the word Islam means submission to the will of Allah. A Muslim is one who has submitted to the will of Allah. And Islam believes there'll be world peace when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. So it is a religion of peace. It's just to them, world peace means world Islam. Right? Our definition of peace is different groups that don't believe the same thing getting along. Their definition of peace is when the whole world submits to the will of Allah. Now, Lincoln said, we all declare for liberty, but in using the same word, we do not all mean the same thing. When Confederates said liberty, it was get the Union troops out. When the North said liberty, it's free the slaves. Right? Same word, but different meaning. So the world is divided in two. The House of Islam, Dar al-Islam, is the part of the world that's submitted, and the Dar al-Harb, the House of War, is the part that's in the process of submitting. So it's supposed to be at war. And a moderate Muslim believes the world will submit to Allah later, maybe in the distant future, maybe at the end of the world. Maybe it's even figurative. And since it's so far off, they really don't think about it, and they just want to live their lives. And they just want to be friends with you. But the fundamental Muslim, they want the world to submit to Allah now. And they're really excited. They want to help make it happen. And the dilemma for the West is the nicer the West shows itself, the fundamental Muslims view that niceness as weakness, and they take that as an invitation to attack. Unfortunately, the law of the jungle is weakness invites aggression. And here's an article. Interview with psychologist Nikolai Sennels. Muslims instinctively see our lack of reaction as fear. It's an invitation to attack. So, but they say, well, it's wrong to kill the innocent. Well, wait a second. We have to define the word innocent. They say that if you reject Allah, you're not innocent. Allah loveth not those who reject the faith. Be ruthless to the infidel unbeliever. Make war on the infidel. Fight the infidel and kill the disbeliever. So when they say it's wrong to kill the innocent, the fundamental ones define that it's wrong to kill a faithful Muslim. But they view the moderate Muslim as having left the true way. And so the fundamental Muslims are just as happy to kill a moderate Muslim as they are to kill an infidel. So the moderate Muslims are sort of in the middle. And so as long as the non-Muslim world shows itself strong, then they're happy to be more Western. But if they show weakness, it's like a drug dealer starts taking over the neighborhood, and they're on your front lawn, and you call the police, and the police show up, arrest them. Are you going to call the police the next time? Yeah. But if you call the police and they don't show up, worse, the drug dealer comes up to your door and says, we have somebody inside the police department and they're snitching on you. If you do it again, we'll kill you. Are you going to call them again? Right? So when the non-Muslim world shows itself strong, boom, they're happy to be westernized. But if we show weakness, anyway. So the word Sunni means a follower. So Muhammad dies, and his general, Abu Bakr, he's the father of Aisha, the 6-year-old that he had married. That's a whole nother story. Abu Bakr said, I was with Muhammad in every battle. I know the way. And so the word, the way, is Sunni. And then Muhammad had a daughter, Fatima. She's married to Ali. And so the followers of Ali are called Shi'ali or Shiite. So 10% of Muslims are Shiite. They're mostly in Iran. And they follow Muhammad's son-in-law Ali. And 90% pretty much are Sunni. And they're different flavors depending on the local imam. And so the moderate ones just want to get along, but there are the fundamental ones. So here's Joram Qadari, Islam for UK, London Daily Press. We've had enough of democracy and man-made law. We call for a complete upheaval of the British ruling system and demand full implementation of Sharia in Britain. So there's areas of New York where they have their Muslim police with their police cars, and they're beginning to enforce Sharia in those neighborhoods. What's Sharia? It's trying to be like Muhammad. So he's the best Muslim that ever lived. And so Christians want to be like Jesus, and Muslims want to be like Muhammad. Pretty simple. Except Christians don't believe they go to heaven by being like Jesus. We believe we go to heaven because we believe Jesus died on the cross to pay for all of our sins. And we're forgiven. And we're so happy that we're forgiven. We want to live like Jesus so we can share the love of God with the world. Not so in Islam. They think their chances of going to paradise are proportional to how closely they follow Muhammad's example. And so what Muhammad permitted is called permitted. That's called halal. And what Muhammad did not permit is not permitted. That's called haram. So Muhammad liked cats. Cats are halal. They are permitted. Muhammad did not like dogs. Dogs are haram. They are not permitted. Right? So just recently, a Muslim from Egypt kicked a dog at the airport, right? And he got deported. And so the Sharia law is a long list of halals and harams, and the local imam keeps the list. It's a religion of do's and don'ts. And you ask, well, why do we do this? Well, you can't ask why. It's just haram. You don't do that. Why do we do that? Well, that's halal. That's permitted. Well, why? You can't ask why. You just got to do it. And so you don't even know why you're doing it. You just have to obey. And so some of Islam comes from the Quran, private revelations to Muhammad in the two different cities, Mecca and Medina. The Hadith is 60,000 stories remembered about Muhammad from his wives and warriors. The Surat is the biography of Muhammad, written 100 years after his death. And then there are 1,400 years of rulings of Muslim scholars interpreting the Quran, the Hadith, and the Surat, and they go into 4 different categories. And so it's complicated. Muhammad owned slaves. Muhammad was a white Arab. He owned black slaves. And Muhammad and his followers captured 1 million Europeans. So there were whole Catholic orders in Europe called the Trinitarians. The head of the order was called the ransomer. And but they enslaved an estimated 180 million Africans. And they'd castrate the men, make them eunuchs, and sell them into the sex trafficking, and sell them throughout the Ottoman Empire. And then eventually they would sell them to the New World. Even David Livingstone, the Scottish missionary to the Congo, writes about stumbling across a line of 1,000 Africans shackled together, being marched hundreds of miles to the coast to be sold into Arab Muslim slavery. And it still goes on today in Mauritania, Niger, and Sudan. Now then they have a period where they become less violent. It's called the Islamic Golden Age. And you have a scholar named Al-Farabi, and he's writing about science and philosophy. You have Avicenna. He's a Muslim scholar writing of philosophy, medicine, math. Averroes, he writes about physics and music and geometry. And if you were to take a snapshot of the world, you would have thought that they're about to have a renaissance. But it all gets slapped down by this guy named Ghazali, second most influential Muslim after Muhammad. He's a mujahideen, which means a renewer of the faith. And he says, stop reading Greek stuff because you could be pulled into the Greek philosophy and get away from Islam. So he said, one should restrain anyone who would immerse themselves in these mathematical sciences, like geometry. For even though they do not pertain to the dominion of religion, yet they are among the foundations of the philosopher's sciences, and the student will be infected with the evil and corruption of the philosophers. So here, there's a closing of the Muslim mind with Ghazali, but the West has St. Thomas Aquinas, and he says it's okay to read Greek stuff. Just eat the hay, spit out the sticks, right? Every now and then, the clock is right twice a day. It's like sometimes a pagan Greek philosopher can stumble onto truth, and if it's truth, it's still truth no matter what. Anyway, so you have Europe developing universities, and then we go, what about the Crusades? That's the next line. But the biggest religion in the world is Christianity, about 33%. Second biggest religion in the world is Islam, about 22%. And then you go to Hindu and Buddhism, and then down to 0.1 or 2% Jewish. And so let's compare. Jesus never killed anybody. Muhammad killed an estimated 3,000 people. So you can compare followers and say, well, you know, the Pope had armies and killed people, and the Muslims had armies and killed people, so every religion has armies and kills people. It's like, let's not compare the followers. Let's compare the founders. Jesus never killed anybody. Muhammad did. Jesus never led armies. Muhammad did. Jesus never owned slaves. Muhammad did. Jesus never married. Muhammad had 11 to 22 wives, slaves, and concubines. Jesus never tortured anybody. Muhammad stretched the chief of Khaybar out on the ground, and they kindled a fire on his chest because he wouldn't tell where the treasure was hidden. Jesus didn't lie. Muhammad permitted lying. It's called taqiyya. If you feel threatened, you can lie and lie to infidels. And then Jesus never forced anybody to follow him. One time he said something difficult. Many followers walked with him no more. He didn't run after him. But Muhammad said, whoever changes his Islamic religion, kill him. And then Jesus forgave insults. He's dying on the cross, right? Muhammad avenged insults. And Jesus did not permit his disciples to rape anyone. Muhammad did. Won't get into that. None of the apostles were governors or generals. All the caliphs were governors and generals. Jesus taught God was our Father. In Islam, it's blasphemy to call Allah your Father. Jesus taught we're children of God. In Islam, it's blasphemy to call yourself a child of Allah, because Allah took no wife and has no son. Jesus taught that we're made in the image of God. In Islam, Allah has no image. Jesus taught to have a personal relationship with God. John 17, this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ is whom you have sent. In Islam, it's blasphemy to even want to have a personal relationship with Allah. He's unknowable. He's forever unknowable. Even in the next life, you'll never meet Allah. And then the first 3 centuries of Christianity, there are 10 major persecutions. Christians are thrown to the lions. The first 3 centuries of Islam, they conquer all the way to Paris. And but I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. And, you know, in a sense, Islam is the religion of Cain. And Christianity is the religion of Abel. What do I mean? Cain wanted to worship God, but he did it through his works. And we know it's works because God told Adam, the ground is cursed for your sake, and you'll bring forth fruit by the sweat of your brow. Sweat is work. Cain was trying to work his way to heaven. There's no lamb in Cain's theology. It's just works. Abel trusted in the lamb. And it's this picture. God is on one side, we are on the other side. Our sins separate us from God, and the lamb takes the judgment for all the sins in our place. And so when Cain's works were rejected, he got filled full of hatred and anger and wanted to murder his brother. It says that Cain's countenance fell. What does that mean? His pride was hurt. He was embarrassed. He only had the mom, dad, and brother, but he was embarrassed in front of them. And he got embarrassed, and so he decided to murder his brother. So the followers of the religion of Cain always want to kill the followers of those who believe in the Lamb. Who was saved in the Old Testament? Everybody that believed in the Lamb. They didn't know his name. They were just doing it right by faith. Well, we know the Lamb's name. And so they had faith in the Lamb to come. We have faith in the Lamb that came, but salvation is through the Lamb. We cannot do enough good works to earn heaven. What do? We trusted in the Lamb, that the Lamb was good enough to take the judgment we deserve in our place.